Hello. Welcome to the Architecting for High Availability and Disaster Recovery webinar from Cloud Architecture 2024 from Cloud Institute. My name is Doug Ortiz, as you can see on the slide, and I'm thrilled to be here presenting for you. We're on schedule, and let us know if there's anything you have in mind. That's it. Let's get started. So, first thing, we're looking at architecting for high availability and disaster recovery. There's many items to discuss in this topic itself, but it's highly important to know the differences, why you should architect for high availability and disaster recovery, how it's important for you, how you can get an understanding and takeaways from this webinar today. We're going to be looking at the digital landscape of system failures and how those impacts can affect your business and everybody else involved. Along, we're going to be understanding the fundamentals, strategies. We're going to discuss them along with techniques for achieving HA and DR, for short for high availability and disaster recovery, along with multi-regions. Then effective backup and restore strategies for best practices and procedures, steps for storage, conducting your regular DR testing, all of those fun things to do there. So, who am I? I am Doug Ortiz. I'm a cloud architect and trainer, and many technologies that I am involved with are cloud, big data, data analytics, engineering, data engineering, databases, DevOps, and platform engineering. A couple that I forgot there to mention was I have experience with big data, data science, AI, artificial intelligence, ML, and all these emerging technologies that we see in the market today. A lot of experience there, and I'm really happy to be here with everybody. Our agenda. This is what it looks like today. We're going to be studying the fundamentals of high availability and disaster recovery, multi-region and multi-cloud strategies, how they benefit you, their advantages, disadvantages, items you should consider and take into account when you're looking into these subtopics here. Load balancing and auto-scaling techniques. We're going to be looking at definitions, purposes, how it works, and the benefits of combining both. The same with effective backup and restore strategies. They are going to be key to how we restore our data, best practices, and steps you can take in considerations for your RTOs and RPOs. Last but not least, disaster recovery planning and testing. Steps that you can utilize to create your disaster recovery plan, the importance of a disaster recovery plan, and common disaster recovery testing methods. As a part of the introduction, we're going to be looking at the high availability and disaster recovery. It has a huge impact to our system failures on businesses. If not, without going so far, recently we all heard on the news recently about some big disaster that impacted the airlines, and it just was chaotic. That's a quick example of not being prepared for a highly available system or for disaster recovery. Those are the key concepts we're going to be looking here so that we can plan for them and prepare to minimize those risks, try to reduce the impact. Remember, you never can fully mitigate those risks 100%, but at least you can get them close to the 9 nines that we're all used to. So that said, what is high availability? High availability refers to designing, architecting a system that will continue to operate continuously without failure for extended periods of time. The goal is to minimize the downtime and ensure that those services are accessible to your end users, whichever they are, whether they're on-premise, in the cloud, on the web, etc., out there worldwide. A quick example could be an email service. Everybody uses any type of email service nowadays, and rarely do they go down. There's been some times that you get some impacts that you don't get your email for a few seconds or minutes, but it's a very, very minimal. And that's a good example of a highly available system. There's plenty others there of your shopping. All these online shopping centers or services, if they're not highly available, guess what's going to happen? They're not going to sell, and they're going to have loss of money, income, etc. That's a couple of examples that you can keep in mind. Then we can move into what is disaster recovery. And disaster recovery encompasses two key aspects: strategies and procedures, so that you can recover from major failures or catastrophic events. The main focus of disaster recovery is restoring your operations after a huge impact to your system, a large disruption. For example, maybe a bank has some disaster recovery, and they should. I don't know for sure. I haven't lately discussed any of these topics with any bank, but an example, they have a disaster recovery in case they get hit locally so that their data does not get lost. People would be upset if they lost money because of a disaster striking a bank on a specific location or online, and that would be disastrous, to say the least. People would be really upset moving their banks and money out of that account. With that said, HA and disaster recovery, HA and DR, are highly important. It cannot be overstated how important they are, because they are the backbone of every business. They maintain the business continuity of your entire operation. Without a robust HA and disaster recovery strategies, you will not be able to be equipped to handle the shift of any changes in the market environment. And those could be quick examples, maybe COVID. Many people, many organizations had to find a quick strategy to shift from on-site, on-premise, to remote. That's just how it works. And everybody was successful. Okay, next topic. What are the fundamentals of high availability and disaster recovery? HA, the systems have to be designed to continuously operate, but they are designed to be redundant and fault tolerant. That's one of the key goals. That might involve clustering, load balancing, automatic failure mechanisms implemented, architected, designed, and developed. The whole idea is, of course, to be 100% uptime. Is that realistic? That's the goal. Doesn't mean it's going to be achieved, but 99% is more than good enough for many organizations. Maybe a quick example is a web application with AWS's EC2, elastic load balancing, to distribute traffic across EC2 instances in different availability zones. That way, if one zone goes down, you're able to easily reroute to another one that is healthy. That's a quick example. When it comes to disaster recovery, there are strategies. You have to create a plan, outline it, how you're planning, how you're thinking of resuming operations after a disaster has struck. That goes from data backups, system restoration, business process recovery. Usually, you have two key KPIs, what they call it here, objectives: recovery time objectives, known as RTO, and recovery point objectives, known as RPO. With these designed, you have to strike a balance and figure out what is the minimum and acceptable losses that you're going to be able to handle or want to handle. An example, maybe a manufacturing company is using Azure Site Recovery to replicate its on-premise systems into the cloud. That way, in case one of their sites, maybe a local site, gets impacted, they can easily move to the cloud and minimize the downtime. The importance of HA and disaster recoveries lie in the ability to minimize your downtime and data loss to keep customer satisfaction and trust. Those are key aspects as well, because if you lose the trust of your customers, most likely it's going to impact your revenue. Also, you have to comply with regulatory requirements. Financial institutions meet SEC regulations that comply for business continuity. Also, they protect you against financial losses and reputational damages. Because, as we already know, reputation goes a long way. Word of mouth spreads pretty quickly. When something goes bad, a lot of people find that out very, very quickly. Okay, we're moving into multi-region and multi-cloud strategies. Let's explore them. There are benefits of having multi-region deployments. Why? The benefits could be quantified into reducing the latency in which you have geographically dispersed users, meaning you're going to be closer to specific users in certain areas. It also increases the fault tolerance and resilience against outages in a specific region. And you comply also with data sovereignty regulations. For example, Netflix uses AWS to deploy its streaming service across multiple regions globally. It allows them to be a seamless serving the content across worldwide to the nearest region, users, viewers. And that improves the streaming quality because they're closer to whoever is trying to access their services, their movies, their media itself. We also have multi-cloud strategies. The biggest one to keep in mind is avoid vendor lock-in. What does that mean? That means maybe you should consider multiple vendors. Maybe not just stick to one. You could have AWS, Azure, and GCP. Chances are a disaster will not impact all three at the same time. Unless if all three are impacted, that means there is a larger issue at stake. Also, keep into account the ability to leverage your best of breed services from different providers. Use the best you can, latest technologies, products, and that means you're going to have to keep up to date, be up to date with all their services. That's nothing new to any of us that are in IT. So that's something to keep in mind. Quick example is a large enterprise might be using Azure for Office 365 integration and AWS for their ML capabilities, GCP for big data analytics tools. As from this example, the takeaway is you're having to strategize which type of data, which type of assets you're distributing across each of these clouds or vendors itself. And that's not a bad thing. That's actually really good because that way you can identify easily when something goes down or disaster strikes, where that vendor might be attached to, where those assets reside, how they're distributed. The other part of it is ensure your latency performance across regions is minimal. One key use of that would be leverage CDNs, content delivery networks. That way you can cache your content closer to the users. Data sovereignty is the compliance of your local data storage and processing laws. Maybe some organizations have to comply depending on the country they work, meaning a certain region might force you to have your data in a specific country or area. That's just because of the law, so that you can be compliant. Also, evaluate the costs, the benefits against increased complexity and the cost increases that any of these vendors might include. Optimizing. There's a lot of cloud cost management tools out there so that you don't have to incur any extra losses or expenditures. Implementing all these strategies will require that you spend time careful planning and architecting for that design, but also it's going to increase your resiliency and your availability there. That's part of being a global organization or being in today's environment of IT. It's just part of the process. Well, let's move on to the next slide, which involves load balancing and auto-scaling techniques. So let's define these. What is load balancing? It's distributing your incoming traffic across multiple servers. The purpose is to ensure that there is no single server becoming overwhelmed or unresponsive. That way you can handle the traffic and distribute it accordingly. This could be done multiple ways: application load balancers, network load balancers, and global accelerators. Many organizations use that. A lot of those who are selling goods online, they leverage this so that they can have better responses towards the goods, the data, how it's cached, and served to their users. Then we have autoscaling. Autoscaling is by definition, the adjustment automatically of your resources based on your traffic demand. We've all heard about elastic computing. It's something similar to that. But what it means to you is if you're having peak times, a lot of traffic at specific hours, your expenditures could be adjusted by increasing the resources of those resources you have online. Let's say, for instance, you're having at lunch, more people are accessing your website to buy your goods. Well, those peak times, you could have auto-scaling to adjust the memory, the resources of your resources online. That way you spend only when you need to. That's really one of the things. Meaning it optimizes your resources utilization and costs while maintaining your performance. You pay for what you use. That's really what it means. Also, the other part of it is too, there's nothing against you mixing and matching load balancing and auto-scaling. In fact, it ensures optimal distribution of your traffic, even as your instances change themselves. And also, it provides seamless handling of traffic spikes without anyone intervening manually. Overall, it increases and enhances your system flexibility and reliability. And not last but least, cost efficiency. Another example could be Netflix. They use load balancing and auto-scaling to handle all these streaming, all the media that they do. That's why sometimes you get a few glitches here, the little pauses, whenever they are experiencing high traffic. It automatically adjusts and then it suddenly goes away. They have implemented and mastered these techniques. That's what I'm saying. Next one. What is the effectiveness of your backup and restore strategies? There's multiple types of backups. Full, which is the copy of everything, as we can see here. We have that available for you. Going to mark it here. We have full. And the definition of full is one of the possible frequencies you have here. The other part is an incremental. The incremental only will handle changes since your last backup. And here's a schedule with a frequency set to daily or where it's going to be stored as well. We also have another option, differential. All changes since the last full backup. These three type of backups will help you stay on top of the changes in your data. Why? Because combining them all together will ensure you have access to your data in its entirety. Why? It's not practical to be performing full backups all the time or every hour. Can you imagine? It's a lot of impact on your resources for the backup itself. We don't know how much data you're storing, but I could probably imagine that it's not going to be some small amount, not going to be a gig or two, probably hundreds, terabytes, petabytes. So that's the reason you segment your backups into different types, full, incremental, differential. And of course, then you might want to change the schedule of these. Maybe a full backup whenever there's a low downtime, maybe a Sunday, midnight. And incremental on Monday through Saturdays. And differential maybe on Wednesdays and Fridays. That way you can ensure that combining any of these or all will give you all the data that you need. And it's peace of mind. Really, that's what it is. So what can we do? Best practices or recommended practices. Schedule regularly backups of your data. Determine the criticality of your data. Mission critical databases, maybe hourly, maybe less critical data, as we were talking before. Different schedules on those. Also, important, offsite and cloud storage. You have to be prepared. Maybe you have to have a backup of a backup of a backup. That's what this means. You might have to back up on cloud storage, offsite, just in case something happens. You don't want to lose all your backups, believe me. If you lose your backups, then there was no point of anything that you were planning for. There was no good planning. And it happens. I've seen certain organizations that they had backups, but they never tested them. And guess what? When they tested them, they found that they were faulty, so they lost all their data. So back to the point of offsite, keeping your media, backed up media, in a secure facility, somewhere where you can access it at any point in time that is needed. Cloud storage. You could store, there's many of these cloud vendors that allows and provides these storage available for you. Glacier is one of those. Long-term, cost-effective backup storage. Each cloud has of those. Also, encrypted. Encrypt your data. You never know. It might need to be prevented from any access that is not authorized. Then we move into restore procedures. What are these restore procedures? We spoke about them in the previous slide about RPOs and RTOs. Our RTO is the maximum acceptable downtime. Depending on your industry, that might not be possible to be more than a minute, 15 minutes. Usually it's measured in minutes. Hours usually that means something's really, really wrong. RPO is the maximum acceptable data loss. How much are you going to lose, willing to lose, or accepting to lose? All of your data? Definitely not. Maybe 1% of your data. It's hard to estimate when you're not really at that point and experiencing the impact of a catastrophe itself. It's really difficult. So you have to create a plan and have these objectives available for you. And of course, backup strategies, as you can see here. Full, incremental, differential. Great. So that means we move to the next slide. We're looking at disaster recovery, planning, and testing. There is a need, the necessity, to creating a disaster recovery plan. Because if one is not available, what do you think is going to happen? If you haven't identified your critical systems, if you haven't defined your RTOs, if you haven't developed any recovery procedures, you're at risk. A plan is essential. If you don't have a plan, there's a saying, you're planning to fail. And that is very true because take an example and just imagine this. If you were just impacted by a catastrophe and you have not planned anything, or even if you have, what is the first thing that's going to happen? Panic. Everybody will start panicking because that's the nature. As humans, we will panic if we're not prepared for it, and even if we are prepared for it. But with a plan, what a plan will give you is step by step what to do in each scenario. People will micromanage in those moments. Some start getting micromanaging people. They will be every 15 minutes. Are you done with this? Have you recovered? Where are we? It's the nature of trying to recover and be ready to move to the next steps. It's highly important for you to identify and analyze what your needs are, critical business functions, and how they are impacted by a disruption. You need to identify your critical system and data. Which IT systems and data are essential for these that will be impacted. And I mentioned before, your RTOs, RPOs, develop your recovery procedures, step-by-step instructions. These have to be as detailed as possible without leaving anything to chance or assuming anything. Because, as mentioned before, when panic sets in, people don't think straight. That's just part of human nature. You're not thinking through. And that could cause even more disaster, even more catastrophic events. It could create a chain reaction of other systems failing as well. So it has to be in great detail, step by step. Who is going to do what? Assign roles, responsibilities, document the plan. Has to be comprehensive and accessible, where it's available to whoever needs to be accessing the information. Maybe a quick example is maybe a company's disaster recovery plan might be prioritizing its production control systems, their supply chain management software, customer order database, and maybe setting it up the RTO for 4 hours and RPOs of 15 minutes so that they can be ready for a failover to a backup site when needed. That's just a quick example. We move into now what is disaster recovery testing. And another important item, because you're validating the effectiveness of your disaster recovery plan. You also intend to identify the gaps and areas where there needs to be improvement and get your staff familiar with recovery procedures, ensuring compliance and all these other regulatory requirements. These should be conducted regularly because if you don't test them, how do you know that you're ready for a disaster striking and affecting you? Most of the time, these are not tested, honestly. So what are your possible strategies? Simulations, full-scale tests. They will help you identify if you have outdated documentation, incomplete documentation, bottlenecks, issues in the process itself. So what are possible scenarios and testing methods again? Let's recap on those. Tabletop exercises, simulating, walking through a scenario where your primary data center is hit by a natural disaster. Like if it was for real. That's the whole point of it. Walking through the tests, step by step, review everything thoroughly. Nothing has to be left out. And then simulate those tests. Practice those control disruptions at full scale as well. Complete failover to a disaster recovery site too. The whole point is this has to be as real as it gets. Because if not, then you're really not testing yourself. And then you're really at risk of being affected by a disaster. If you don't test and practice to great length each one of these, you are at risk. So test, test, test. That's one of the largest parts that we have to keep in mind. And believe me, experience has taught me one thing, that many times, this is one of the biggest items that is left out. Again, one example, a specific organization never tested their backups, years of years. Others, they had their entire DR plan, but they left out one step. Test those backups and test if they were actually, the media that were being stored was actually working. They performed all their tests, everything was successful, but their tapes were faulty. Guess what? They lost a lot of data, etc. Some organizations might not even have backup plans. And that occurs. You'd be surprised. Many organizations might not have backup plans. So whenever disaster strikes, they either are able to recover some data or none. Great. We make great headway here. Let's move on to another slide here. Here we're looking at a few examples of using the AWS claim for copying files to a S3 into a bucket from a region, then copying from a file to an S3 backup, creating snapshots. All of this is done with a CLI and a few examples. By no means, it's a full disaster recovery plan with each step itself. These are just examples of what those tests, what possible steps could be involved in these scenarios. Each one of these is useful. Remember, every little step builds up to a larger part. Same here. Some alarms. We're using CloudWatch, creating a CloudWatch alarm. CloudTrail for auditing as well. Each one of these has their steps and purposes. They're useful. And that's the whole part of the process. CloudWatch, an alarm, CloudTrail, start the logging. Believe me, one step is missed, it could be the missing piece of the puzzle that makes everything not work and brings everything down and falls apart. Another one we can use here, AWS config. Notice here. Or configuring your recorder. We're getting a resource configuration or a Lambda function or invoking a Lambda that has part of your recovery plan. A few examples. There's multiple ways. Which technology, which platforms, which tools you utilize are really up to you. That's really the outcome of that. You know your systems better than anybody else. We're just giving some examples here. Great. Let's keep on moving along. So what tips can we find about using the CLI? If you're going to use the CLI in this case scenario, always ensure that your CLI is configured, you have right credentials. Again, part of the test. If you're going to use a tool, you have to test it. You have to make sure it's properly configured and that it works, along with its parameters, commands, resources that it will access. Why? Because imagine that part of your disaster recovery plan is to use the CLI to recover from the cloud and from a bucket that you have in Glacier or any bucket in particular. And if you don't have your CLI configured, chances are you haven't even set the credentials and permissions correctly, meaning you're going to be scrambling around when the time comes to recover those resources, that data there. Leverage the help. It's very comprehensive. You'd be surprised, but it's very detailed and comprehensive. Nothing wrong with that. In fact, that's a good bonus for all of these CLIs. They're very, very comprehensive. So recapping. Fundamentals of HA and disaster recovery. Understand them well. Know what they are, their definitions, what they stand for, how they can be used and intertwined with other strategies, technologies, multi-regions, multi-cloud strategies, load balancing, auto-scaling techniques, backup and restore strategies, but effective ones. Disaster recovery, planning and testing. This is crucial itself. Implement all these strategies and best practices. They will greatly enhance your system's resilience and increase the ability to maintain your operations in order to be being continuous, nonstop. Whenever you face a failure or disaster, that will help you have a good fighting chance at least. Takeaways. Well, HA and DR, they're critical for your business continuity. Today's digital landscape, you cannot afford to not have them. Yes, some might not take them into account, budget constrictions, restrictions, etc., but they are critical nonetheless. Take a multi-layered approach, combine various strategies, multi-region, load balancing, auto-scaling, all of them combined will give you the best protection. Have a regular backup schedule, test them, and make sure that they work. Have an area, an environment, an off-site location that you can test them and make sure that you can actually verify that the data was recovered, that there is continuity of business, that it could happen, that traffic can be managed, redirected, and that you will continue operating the business successfully. Your disaster recovery plans should be comprehensive and updated regularly, along with being thoroughly tested from start to finish. It's going to be a continuous improvement here, iterative, going to keep on going. You're never going to stop changing these procedures, strategies. They're going to evolve and improve. So, if anything you can take from this webinar is architecting for high availability and disaster recovery is an ongoing process. Requires regular reviewing and updating your strategies so you can keep pace with your business and your needs, platform, technologies, because you might be moving from one cloud vendor to another. If your disaster recovery plan does not take that into account and does not document it, then you should, because you're going to run into trouble. Last but not least, the next steps. Assess your current status of your HA NDR capabilities. Find out, make sure they're there. What's missing, what's not missing, what you have, what you do not have. Identify the gaps and areas for improvement and develop a roadmap for enhancing your resiliency. Start with small wins. That's how you build up until you get to the final all-encompassing strategy that will require some long-term involvement, but you will get there. And don't be afraid of fostering a culture of failure. That's the whole idea. We all fail. We always will find some hiccups, problems. But if you don't fail, you don't learn from it. And it's going to allow you to improve on yourself and your organization as a whole in the end. As mentioned here, we have all these other techniques that we were talking about. We talked about load balancing, the effectiveness of your backups, your disaster recovery planning and testing. And want to thank you. Thank you for attending this webinar.